Gary Chase covers FedEx for Barclays Capital. He joins us from their offices in New York. Gary, thanks for coming on Street Smart. Let me ask you about were you surprised by the strongly positive release by FedEx, or is this about what you expected?
We're a little more surprised with what we actually saw in the quarter. We knew there were some real challenges here. They had a timing issue. Fuel prices rose pretty rapidly during the course of the quarter. That created some headwind for them to overcome. And I think what you saw was a very solid result under the circumstances. Strong outlook for their fiscal 2012, which is, the next 12 months. Pretty consistent with what we had been thinking, and I think consistent with a robust economy and a modest growth economy and a robust fundamental case for the industry, as it relates to FedEx and also UPS.
Now, you say modest, from robust to modest, right? But the first thing I thought of when I read this story today was, wow, it's a bellwether for the economy. It's boosting its estimates here, and its only problems it lists are higher fuel costs and the reorganization of a unit. That has to, and of course the slowdown in Japan, which is temporary. So that has to say great things about the U.S. economy, right?
Well, I think in particular the transportation companies are tied to the industrial economy. And what FedEx is talking about today is pretty consistent with what we've heard across the board. I do think the companies are acknowledging that we hit a little bit of a soft patch during the quarter, but there's some optimism that we're going to be past that shortly. And I think their outlook going forward is consistent with a pretty normal, modest growth type of environment. So certainly would suggest that we're not getting any worse from here.
Gary, let me ask you about another company that competes with FedEx, UPS. They report July 26th. How does this bode well for their earnings report?
Yeah, it sure does. I mean, I think one of the big drivers of upside here was the pricing that we saw, particularly in the domestic package business, and that is clearly applicable to UPS. Some of the strength you saw was FedEx specific. You mentioned the freight restructuring earlier. We had some very strong performance in their ground segment. But the pricing that we saw across the domestic business, both ground and air, certainly bodes well for UPS in the weeks ahead.
What about UPS? I mean, I was talking with an editor this morning, and we were looking at the prices. FedEx has had a great year in 2011 as far as the stock is concerned. UPS, not so much. Why are they lagging?
Well, I think if you look over a longer period of time, you'd see a performance, you'd see less of a gap. Actually, I think I'm quite frustrated with the way UPS has performed, and FedEx to some extent. I think they should be doing better, given the fundamental story that we're seeing play out here, and particularly this issue that I was talking about earlier, the upside that we're getting in the domestic pricing arena, really reversing several years of sub-inflationary price that we saw from 06 to 09.
All right, hey, Gary, thanks very much for that. Gary Chase,
thanks very much.
Talking about FedEx.